last video discussing what the command structure for the British Army is. Well, a little bit of research. Hill and Uxbridge, at the point of this battle, are both lieutenant generals. Now, this is just a little bit of Google foo here in terms of what I was able to find, because I'm not going to spend forever on it. There's nothing in the rules, and I'm going to go with my gut no matter what. But Uxbridge, according to online sources, was promoted to a full general in 1819. I see no indication that Hill ever was. However, Hill replaced Wellesley as in command of the overall British Army, which to me indicates that he certainly had to have been promoted to that rank, if there was anybody else kicking around at that rank in the Army still. My assumption is that Hill outranks Uxbridge, still stands. I think what I'm going to do is, I think what's going to happen is Hill's going to take command of the army. He's going to dispatch Uxbridge with his corps, Hill's corps, and some of Uxbridge's cav. And Uxbridge is going to divide the cav up. Yeah, again, that seems like a rational decision to make if Hill is going to take command of the overall army. And that force is, of course, going to go to help defend the Wavre entranceway. Things don't look good for the Brits no matter what, but the very, very thin and ragged red line. Rain is one of the major effects at Waterloo, and I've been trying to consider how to represent it in the game, because it's just there, it's just present on the time record sheet with no rules to cover it. Now, Napoleon had learned earlier, I believe at the Battle of Huerta, at the very least, that his artillery was not going to be effective in very sodden ground. And that's one reason he delayed as long as he did. And it's the delays that Napoleon took. The first, in not pursuing as hard as possible, and maybe the second being this little delay in the morning of Waterloo itself, to wait until the ground was firm enough that his cannonballs could have the effect that he wanted from them. So I'm seeing a couple of effects to think about. First of all, not many Napoleonic battles were fought in a rainy situation, especially not in a heavy rain. I'm at odds to think of one where the battle was actually fought during the rain. For me, that means you could either say, well, you can't do anything during the rain, or you could march maybe at a reduced rate or something because the roads are crappy. But that crappiness is something that degrades over time. It wouldn't be the first turn, so they'd have to be very complicated rules. If I had my old minis rules, but I don't think I have them here, that covered some effects, I would try to translate those. But my thinking is this. First of all, I would put a penalty on artillery fire, both as the rain is coming down, because sighting and such not is terrible, and then for some significant time afterwards if the ground is going to be mushy, as it will be. So that's one thing I'm going to put. I think a half penalty on the artillery firepower, which means it's just plinking, and it might actually reduce range during the full rain. A penalty on fire at musket fire, because quite honestly, muskets are somewhat less effective in the rain. You're not dealing with matchlocks and such not, but the misfire rate is a little higher. I'm not quite sure whether this is worth actually dealing with. I was thinking about a -1 penalty on the total fire effect. So if if you get like 8 points on someone, you still do on the 7 table, instead of like -1 per unit, which I think would be excessive. Or I may just ignore that. Melee. I don't think normal melee is going to be terribly affected, because some of, we're not dealing with casualties versus morale effects and such on. And this is one reason why firepower might not be that big a deal. It might not be changed that much on infantry fire. So for the melee table, I'm not going to make any effect on that except for cav. Again, mushy ground, terrible for the Cav. I'm not quite sure what to do there. At least a -1, maybe a -2 to the Cav's melee multiplier until the ground dries. Again, good, strong reason for Napoleon not to go. And that's going to apply while the heavy rain's going too. The final is fatigue. Units probably, when moving or doing anything, or fighting or anything else in the rain, are going to become more fatigued more quickly. So I'm thinking about doubling fatigue costs during the rain. Basically making it so you don't want to do shit during the rain. And if we're talking long distance movement, maybe reduce movement rates a little bit as well, and figure out if that's going to have any effect. Because the game doesn't really handle, say, the Prussian difficulty in arriving because of the rain, in arriving at Waterloo. So, you know, if that ends up being a situation that, anyway, again, you gotta kind of fly by the seat of your pants with these rule sets, and that's not so terrible, to tell you the truth, except that because normally you wouldn't be dealing with rain, so most games wouldn't have special rules for rain, but this gives you all kind of options, you know, like over here on the first of all, you have the Grand Campaign, which is problematic. But on the Waterloo scenario, let's see if we have any interesting options, like an early start or something like that, which clearly could have happened, you know? I do not see an early start option. I see the no rain option, which is the early start. So, you know, the idea is, yeah, the rain was pretty much prohibitive of the attack. And I am perfectly willing to just say, hey, you can't do anything during rain turns. But I think if I add, you know, at least in my head, good reasons you don't want to do anything, I'll be a little happier with not doing anything during them. And what now is becoming a regular occurrence, a damn counter blow from the open window, of course. The stuff back here was fine, but I don't know if this moved the page or if the actual counter's blue. I suspect the page got flipped a little up. I should have a rock on it, yeah. I'm gonna try to guess. I don't think it's worth looking through the video to try to find the right amounts for the fatigue. Doing something kind of funky. Von Damme showing up here was very fatigued, and he's still worse than that. Oh god, I don't know what I had. Oh no, he's over here. Yeah, he's got a high fatigue level. And I don't want to come on the map and get knocked back facing, you know, within movement range of this British position if I'm this fatigued. So I am saying they're deploying back here and resting a bit. And we're going to pile up some units behind them too, but, you know, it's just a matter of things. Once they reach here, I'm going to give them the chance to recuperate because they're close enough that they can start deploying. And by taking this rest, I'll let them deploy also, you know, not right on the road, which would create a bit of a traffic jam anyway. Over here, everybody pretty much rested. Grouchy and Derlon got together so that Grouchy can give orders to Derlon. And they really don't have orders, and this should have been done earlier. But von Bülow also was fatigued, and, you know, part of my way of fixing the counter loss thing is, hey, they're all resting. So yeah, and I don't think that's an unreasonable choice here, although for Bülow, he has a real desire to get a jump on things, and obviously so should Grouchy have a desire to get a jump to get on the other side, but whatever. It'll help fix the issues to slow them down, and it's not at all unreasonable given how slowly Grouchy did things historically. Okay, so with Girard and Bülow's troops interspersed on the same road, and it's because I left Ligny by the silly road for the French to leave it by, but whatever. We're getting to some really goofy situations here, where we've got Prussians, the French came up, hit them from behind lightly, and now the Prussians come forward and have the French surrounded. Now the French could have not charged this and could have deployed up here, which would have been kind of reasonable, right? Because of what we had, one French stack route disordered off the map. That's these guys. That's a bunch of units just gone. Edge of the map crap. In this case, I'm kind of looking at it as, look, there's engagements going on over here. There's no way that this is the actuality of what's going on here. If Bülow and Girard are both moving into the same area, they're going to deploy and they're going to fight, and we're seeing some of the results of that, and that's all that's happening. The French are taking some artillery fire here. It's been to some effect as well. Otherwise, that's about it. I think that's turn, and this is the 11 a.m. turn. Of which we're going to have that same kind of silliness coming in here, because Chasse comes in at 8. I'm sorry, at noon, and here we have who? Mouton coming in. No, that's over here. Ney coming in at noon, and I think almost all his troops come in then. So we're going to have another mess over here, and these are just kind of silliness. You're not getting a representation of what's actually happening. Things are a little silly here. These guys, I think, actually ran off the map. I'll take care of them in a minute. But basically, and they're going to very shortly, basically, D'Erlon and Grouchy have driven Bülow's forces that were kind of trying to position themselves here out of existence. The reserves from this infantry division came up. They're in Wavre now. This one's pretty much decimated by the edge of the board. I think there's 2 divisions there that just got wrecked. And very little loss because they got pinned against the side. Well, the French did lose one big stack, and they had, I noticed, I had forgotten to route Pajol off the map, so he's off the map. Over here, Hill's beginning his movement over. He sent some orders to Uxbridge. I have to decide what the heck to do here, because I've got this kind of strong point at Place Noire, but the French guard is trying to slip around the side of it. And yes, it would still be a strong point, but it may not be able to serve as the anchor for a line. So it's possible that I'll have to pull back from this initial line, which is a pity, because as things stand, this French force, if it does attack, it suffers from the edge of the board situation as well. Not quite as badly as what's going on over here. You don't just like get hit and fall off the board. You're going to have to route to run off, or you're going to have to try to rally, you know, which of course you'll do. But you also have to fail. It looks like these guys are going to be making a nice race to get onto the Waterloo map. Unfortunately, that means Girard and Mouton are going to be left alone back here. Grouchy decided to go, you know, pedal to the metal here, and completely unlike. I rolled a die to make the decision. It had to come over 1. And that means he's abandoning 2 full corps to try to figure out what the hell to do. And I'll have to make a decision command-wise whether Girard or Mouton is going to be in charge there. It doesn't make much difference. I also found I've got units of Rail's command that got accidentally moved off with Vendôme. It wasn't hard. The way the roads are, very easy to get in the wrong position. and follow the wrong troops. So these guys are heading off to join them. I think this is actually their lone unit here. Yeah, and I got nothing better to do than just leave it attached at this point. It's just got no way to try to rejoin its core. So I'm assuming, you know, temporary attachment, whatever. Plight of my glasses is kind of annoying because I'm finding that I can't use these progressives to look at what I want to look at. I don't think I'd be any better off with bifocals. When I'm trying to look at a counter, I'm looking through the center of my eyes at the counter. Now, if I tilt my head, you know, so it's like instead of looking like this, I'm looking like this, I can get a slightly better view, but that's a lot of work to do. It's easier for me to pick up the counter and just bring it close to my eyes, which worked before, you know. It's a little easier now because I can bring it close to my eyes with the magnifying part. But these counters, just the numbers on them are AWE tiny. Just the identification number, which normally wouldn't be that big a deal, but it's absolutely vital in this game because all the records are on paper. Side of the noon turn, Grouchy and Derlon are pulling back out to get to Waterloo and figure out what they're going to do there. Mouton comes on the board, and you can see I've set up to just create this ambush. Now, I'm going to hold off with the Prussians because they don't want to walk into that crowd. But the last Prussian division's not going to be going into that. It's just going to wait. And, you know, maybe they can deploy to the side or something, but it's just too ugly. Otherwise, everything in whatever's left of the 2nd and 3rd Division is all disordered here. We got this same kind of mess happening here. The French have chosen to be a little clever about it and set up, you know, a little arc so it's going to be difficult for Orange's troops to walk on. But it's not, by giving them some space, it's not going to be as horrible a situation where they get turned on and knocked off the board as easily. They actually have room to try to, you know, walk away, taking a few skirmisher shots, and that's it. With the guard artillery unable to go through these woods where the guard's being sent, we're forming a grand battery here that's just pummeling this. And between this movement here and the grand battery, I just really don't think the English should be standing there. But there aren't a lot of English. It's not like there's a huge amount of French, but there's enough locally here that this position can't be held, and I got nothing to throw in as a reserve. I've got to throw Hill up this way, as noted before. So that's, you know, I think I should just be withdrawing from the map as the Brits here. The loss at Ligny was too great, and we're too outnumbered. And there's nothing going in our favor. No mud, no rainstorm yet. That's coming soon enough, but may end up delaying the battle from really starting today. Here on the WAF map, the Prussians are not coming in, as I said. Bulow ran over here, rallied a unit. He's leaving those there so that he can rest rather than take additional fatigue losses for withdrawing them further. That's an iffy choice, but it feels like the important thing is holding, well, it can't be there like that, is holding the town itself and the crossings to prevent the French from slipping another couple corps across. If he can hold off 2 corps with this, that'd be great. How effective he's going to be, I don't know. You know, it really depends on how much the French are willing to just say march and avoid them, because they're not blocking all the bridges and they're not in a position to do so. Let's see, over here, delay. Why? Well, Hill's decided to send out some additional interesting orders. in addition to the Uxbridge putting him in charge of Hill's infantry corps and splitting up the cav all over the place, what Hill's planning on doing is slamming down. He sees this as a very weak position and saving these units, as it were, by smashing into Ney's force. And then maybe he can accomplish something. Over here, I've given them orders to hold and withdraw when necessary back to the next line, say back around here. I was debating whether or not to go with the, sort of actual defense, which is take a couple of breakpoint strong points and hold this ridge line up here. In the intention of, making the French pay the most for every step. The problem is withdrawing is so painful. Of course, it's more painful when you're close in, and that's what I'm afraid is going to happen. But what I'm hoping is that Orange's forces can destroy Ney's command, which is sort of segmented, with support from these coming from both directions. And then the numerical advantage won't be so great. Of course, if this shit all comes in, I'm in trouble. As we end 12:30, French Mouton Girard pulling away. Now, probably the best thing they could have done was leave one of the corps just sitting here and take advantage of the edge of the map and prevent the Prussians from ever coming on. Conceivably, though, the Prussians could say, we're maneuvering around, and I would have to figure something out from that. So instead of trying to add more complexity of that sort, I'm just swinging them here as far as Le Mail, and then from there, they're going to have to try to figure out what kind of orders to have. Now, Grouchy has not sent any orders to them, and he can only send one per turn. He's probably aware they're on the map at this point. Derlon started pulling off. We got him over here. We can see the Prussians slipping by because now the French aren't blocking the road that they come in on. Meanwhile, the English, Orange's forces gathering up here off map. We got orders to move forward, accepted. We sent some orders to these guys to fall back, but not until, I hope I wrote, oh no, I haven't written them yet. But not until Orange is falling back or they're really threatened. Now they might be really threatened because the Guard is setting up over on their flank. There's a little bit of a strong point here, but there's some danger that the Guard could outflank us back there. And that would be really troublesome, actually, if they positioned themselves in this area. So, we may need to initiative for that. Meanwhile, Uxbridge has taken over Hill's command, grabbed some of his cav, distributed other cav to the flanks, and this little group is going to go towards Wavre and try to prevent things there, again with the orders to fall back as needed, basically. Okay, 1 p.m. turn done, and there might be some fighting because we got Orange coming down this way and from here. The position was so bad that the French, before they even saw it happening, Ney gave orders, as I was saying before at one point, to pull back and connect with Van Damme. This outflank just did not work, and it looked horrible with units coming from behind. Most of the French army is standing in place and holding. The Grand Battery is doing a pretty good job against whatever the British can muster against that. We got Hill's former corps under Uxbridge heading up this way. Over here, Derlon's forces waiting on this artillery. They don't get a rest because the rest of them are over there coming on later. Mouton Girard, they're going to cluster here. I've got orders. Why don't I run out and get those orders? Going to Mouton, I got to write more orders for Girard. Grouchy can only set out one set of orders per turn. He didn't move. He's protecting this artillery as well as sticking around to give orders. For VlE, hard call. You know, I would love to move forward and try to maybe interfere with this exit and set myself up against those guys. If I can delay 2 core with my 1, that'll help a lot. Even if they're kind of small, crappy core, but here's the problem. And of course, it might help if I'm coming in behind them as well, but that seems kind of iffier. The problem is I had a couple of disordered units back here. And I went and rallied 1, and because I'm not near the front, I can't move the command ahead of the leader by too much. So if I'm going to rally those units, I kind of have to stick around back there. I didn't even take a chance at rallying these 2 because I'm too close to the edge of the board. Yeah, I'd withdraw here, but then it means I must succeed on the next go, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, this is officially their line of communication, but man, when you're close to it, like with deploying here, not being a complete stickler for that. It's funny, all of our losses have been edge of the board issues, every single unit there. And almost all of the casualties are on those units. A couple little casualties left and right from fire combat over here. Nothing over here yet. This hasn't suffered. The entire French army could get pushed off the map and then boom, it's over. You know, all campaign gone. Of course, the British army isn't strong enough to do that, so it's not happening. End of the 130 turn, and Derlone, I believe, moved the rest of his units off the board. Some of them were cav, which are going to be able to catch up because of the different speeds between infantry and cav when they're dealing in the off map. In fact, conceivably, they could have gotten there had they left last turn, a turn before the guys who left before them, except roadblock issues, right? So them leaving the board at this point was fine. But those were just Derlone's cav. There's still 1 artillery piece I'm trying to shepherd out. Looks like Bulow's not chasing them though. Gerard decided to ignore his, Mouton decided to ignore his orders, which may mean that Grouchy has to wait yet another turn before sending his own cav out. Gerard, we haven't rolled yet. He's just got his orders. Then over here, Bulow took another resting turn to get his unit rallied. We only have an hour of clear weather. It's obviously probably overcast at this point and looking icky, but the players shouldn't be aware that it's definitely going to be a big bad rainstorm. Weather prediction was not that good, but you know, you can tell it's going to be a storm and probably means most of the day, the rest of the day of battle. Over here, Orange's forces, left a skirmisher behind, have pushed forward on both flanks, coming in from the side, and, well, I may be being overly liberal with my orders. The way they're written, they're to extricate these guys. However, when I wrote them, I did have an intention of trying to destroy Ney's force, so I feel like I should be able to put just a little bit more pressure than maybe the written order would indicate. So that's... Over here, the French continue to trade artillery fire with the Brits. That's not good for the Brits. They don't have as much artillery, period, and most of the French artillery is actually concentrated right there. You can see Uxbridge is going up here, continuing to head up to that, probably this hill line here. I noticed some interesting things. So the coloration on the maps is kind of weird. So I think this is meant to be a village, okay. Although that color looks maybe similar to this. This, I think, is the cultivated terrain, which is weird because that's not what I was reading as the cultivated terrain over on the Ligny map. Maybe what I'm seeing, because I am seeing the same terrain over here, over in this crap. Maybe what I'm seeing here is that there's difficult terrain and cultivated. Unfortunately, there's no key that shows you, at least that I found and remember that shows you an image of the terrain and what it represents. I think this is maybe difficult and this is cultivated. Back when I was on Ligny, I was not treating this as any kind of special thing. I just thought, hey, that's, you know, a house or two and some crap, and that this was supposed to be the cultivated. But I think that's actually more like brambles and wetland near the river, which would be difficult. Anyway. That's what I think is being represented at this point. It really confused me because I saw things like, wow, this color terrain is the same as this. Now, with the better lighting now, I can tell a difference. And I thought maybe the hilltops were miscolored because you have kind of a coloration for the level that goes here and that's here, but that this, which is very similar to the level color, as you can see where they're right up against each other, is actually meant to represent the cultivated terrain. Whatever, you know, it would really help if they had provided a terrain key in full color. And maybe there's one, not in full color obviously, but maybe there's one in the rule book. It wasn't in the scenario book that I recalled. And I would doubt it because none of the other rules versions have the terrain on here. The Spanish one, I think, gives some kind of key on the terrain chart, which is very helpful. This neglected to do that. So, you know, you have to kind of guess what the terrain means. Yeah, but I was looking at this and saying, wow, wait, they just totally miscolored this map. And then later on, I start to realize, wow, that actually is the same color as this, which is not quite the same as this. And it all depends on how well lighted the maps are. They looked fine under natural lighting, but this is kind of icky. And I actually thought it was an error because of the way it looked. And it was kind of depressing me. It still kind of depresses me because I think what there should be is I think there should be the same color as the terrain up here, and I think there should be almost a color overlay here just to show the level. As it is, it looks like depressions all over the place. This not so much because I'm used to that as villages, but this other stuff, yeah, wasn't registering quite the same. All right. Actually, earlier I made up these rules for rain. I actually have them. They're the same as the night rules. That's probably reasonable for anything except, say, the last couple hours of the supposed rain turns. Because these last couple hours are when the rain has already stopped. Now, movement would be slower, which maybe is represented by the fact that the turns are an hour long each. Of course, off-map movement is by hours as opposed to by turns, which is goofy. And then, what else? Fire combat probably is fine for infantry, which wouldn't be allowed under, you know, the nighttime or normal rain. So I'm going to mostly go with those. I may make a modifier for the last couple rain turns if I want, but otherwise I think they actually handle things correctly. PM's done, and this is coming up on the last good weather turn. You can see Nay's little command here has gotten pretty much crushed by orange. It was fatigued and not in great shape, even though it didn't get hit from both sides really. It is getting, you know, forced by the flank. And trying to withdraw in the face of the enemy, always a tough thing. We have a lot of disorder going on. Over here, Napoleon actually had a shot of getting killed by some... The Brits have managed to get heavier artillery in place through the rallying functionality or fatigue strength recovery. And otherwise, mixed results in terms of rallying over here. Uxbridge, just about in position, fatigued as hell. Bülow moving, and he's decided to take up orders to try to block the road, prevent Mouton and Girard from getting through. He thinks they outnumber him, So throwing both sets into the chaos here, especially following up on Darlon, etc., it might be interesting, but it seems more effective to just try to prevent them from getting through in any numbers. Block them off, prevent them from engaging, and hope that, you know, whatever the Brits do up here is sufficient to hold off Darlon's corps, which is pretty potent, actually. And the numbers don't look good. It would have really helped if the Brits had more aggressive orders here. I felt like I couldn't really pursue any further, or without an initiative check, which with a replacement leader, it's probably not going to succeed. It probably just cause more problems than not, although I might check next turn for a little bit more chance. And otherwise, I really have to give up the position that I'm in right now. It's just not... There's some advantages to it, but I see this and I'm like, no way, man. I'm not going to be able to hold that. If I take the rain and the night to reposition, say, back in, you know, the historical kind of positioning, I think I should be okay. But we'll see. Because the problem is once you settle down to a defensive position, the enemy starts to... They make their decision on what to attack. Well, if you have sort of a flank over here, it may not be as easy to defend as one would hope. At the end of the turn before the rain starts in earnest, VlE pulling back into position to cover here. Mouton has orders to consider. Yeah, I think he took his orders. There we go, yeah. Okay. But he's not implementing them yet. Uxbridge continuing his movement over here, the British line. An initiative roll. Orange. And I should have a little penalty marker for him, which will confuse the hell out of me because I haven't used one in a long time. He came forward and pretty much demolished Ray's forces. Threw him over the first demoralization level, and the routes from that throw him over the second, basically, in the next half of the turn. I'm doing it both sides of the turn, which can cause things to collapse a little more quickly. You can see everything's just kind of falling apart here. He's got almost nothing left. There's not an effective unit there anymore. However, the Guard charged in its turn. Going into column formation, they managed to take the Plancenoit, and the situation looked so degraded I didn't want to try to hold it, but I am still holding this location here. Remember, facing doesn't matter, I'm in a village. To anchor the line rather than falling back completely yet. The rain looks like it's coming. That should provide us with some cover, but one problem with it is the Guard can charge when it's raining. Of course, they can only charge if they're next to you, so they can move up next to you and wait a turn, and then you can withdraw, and then they can move up next, right? So I should be able to find better terrain and give up some ground. I think this attack is pretty much done. I can't see launching a bayonet charge in the mud with Orange's troops. I think they have to withdraw at this point. Basically, the initiative was, hey, can I push just a little bit more before I, do my orders? So, it looks like that may be more or less the end until the next day, just because we got the rain, the night, and then soggy ground or whatever. That'll prevent at least the artillery from firing. I'll probably allow infantry fire at that point if I want it. Otherwise, see, the problem here is if I treat that just as pure night, it's not only does it bother my sensibilities in terms of being able to fire musket fire, but the other thing is I think it actually gives an advantage to the French attackers, which is to say they're not facing the thin red line of firepower anymore. That infantry line is not going to be able to repulse a bayonet charge in the same way. So they'll have to either give up ground or be sitting in such strong points that it doesn't really matter. So I also have to look up the special rules for the heel mount. What I'm going to implement for the rain is the standard rules, plus when it's not raining anymore, and I'll look that up, I'm allowing small arms fire. When it is raining, I'm going to charge, and this may go for night as well, double fatigue. The reason for that is these are hour-long turns. Although, see, I'm kind of questioning this one, but I think this is the thing that will prevent attacks from happening, is the fatigue is what breaks up attacks. And otherwise, I think the Guard is just going to love the rain, and it's going to go marching through it and smashing the British out of the way everywhere. Fatigue wasn't taken into account probably when the rules for the rain were made. It's an option. Fatigue is an optional rule, and the designer doesn't tend to account for all the possible options. It would be almost impossible, to tell you the truth, because there's just so many different configurations to the game. Way through first turn of the rain, Mouton starts moving. Nothing too exciting there, but here, the Guard, and they're fatigued as hell. Remember, I'm charging double fatigue, plus they pay another point, not two, for the actual charges. The Guard comes slamming in along with Vendôme. Now, Vendôme, I found myself with, 3 regiments of d'Arlon over here. You know, I can't adjust the morale levels on these things, but man, charging in the rain is just awesome. You don't suffer any first fire. There's no penalty for it, which, you know, I don't know that there should be, right? It's obviously harder on the attacker, but it's also obviously harder on the defender to deal with a rain assault. Probably because there were so few of these, I think I would add an additional penalty, because this was just too easy. Now, granted, this is the Guard, you know, but it's the French attacking in column without taking any fire, without taking any real penalties until they get close and they make their roll. And they just overran this ridge, the town, everything. They probably could have under normal conditions too, but it was a little easier here. The only negative, Vendôme's already accumulated 3 points of fatigue. The Guard is up at 2 penalties plus a point. The only bright spot for the Brits is Ney tried rallying a unit and it went off the board. Napoleon successfully, though, was able to rally those very, very tired units. I probably shouldn't be rallying them, at least not without Napoleon there, but I felt like I need something here because I'm not sure what the Brits' orders are, but maybe they could keep pressing against us and wrecking what's left there, and that would be pretty damn bad for us. You know, a rain assault on disordered troops is just as good as anything else. Cav is completely useless. Artillery is completely useless. All you've got is infantry slogging through the mud. And, well, you know, yes, that takes away a lot of the French advantage, but attacking in column gives you a bonus, you know? And when you don't have to deal with incoming fire. Plus, another cool thing, all these stupid skirmishers, they just kind of melt away. They're totally worthless in the rain because they can't fire, so they don't have any effect. All right, I'll handle the Brits' turn. They're probably going to be pulling back, but they don't really have an option. One nice thing, there's no penalty for withdrawal. You can't be cav countercharged. I assume countercharges are disallowed as well. It doesn't specify that, but I cannot imagine a cav charge being mounted in the kind of rain that would affect artillery fire that heavily. And you don't take any opportunity fire, so there's no penalty to wandering away. End of the turn, the Prussians are beginning to look like they're taking a position. as is Uxbridge up here. And, you know, it's still a little disorganized, but I don't know if I want to waste the double fatigue penalty at this point. The problem is, if the enemy starts to approach, I really have to. And the enemy is approaching here. Although I may not be aware with the rain. It must be pretty heavy. Over here, so here's the problem. Yeah, they're pulling out just fine. But over here, I've got units pressing me. And they can just charge forward and hit the disorganized bunches. The cav can still retreat, so that probably is safe. But these other units are trying to run away, and you know, most of them that are in danger are actually disordered units that are just going to get mopped up. A pursuit in the rain doesn't sound like a really likely thing, but in part that's because the cav's not going to be involved in it. But pursuing the disorganized units is pretty easy in breaking them up. So I'm expecting that Wellington's reserve is pretty much going to be spent on this. And there really wasn't an option, you know. I mean, if I tried to stand in any form, I would be overrun. The only option would have been to withdraw earlier. And maybe the French wouldn't have attacked then. As it stands, I'm just hosed. None of this has to do with any modifications that I've put to the rain turns. This could happen at night too. There's, you know, it's kind of funny because these scenarios, like scenarios in most tactical war games, end up just as, you know, there's this edge of the day of the battle, which is just defined somewhere. And in this case, it's quite a long one. But if it were, you know, the individual battles, they would just end at a certain point, and boom, now you score. Well, there's no such edge here, and I think reality falls in between the two, which is to say there is no real edge ever in reality, but there also isn't quite this opportunity to take someone out in terrible weather or at night or whatever. I think the rules to this for night and for rain aren't sufficient to prevent somebody from launching a pretty hefty attack. And if anything, I've tried to make those rules harsher on the attacker. I'm beginning to think a penalty on the melee table is probably applicable. Maybe I missed something. But, oh no, I can't charge them. I can't charge them. I forgot that you have to start adjacent. Actually, the Brits should have been able to withdraw here a little bit. Well, they'll be able to get out. We'll leave it as it is, because that was just the start of the rainfall. Chances are then, you know, we're going to do kind of a lackadaisical pursuit, because it's really not, it's not worth pushing as hard as possible with high fatigue levels. So that'll help a little bit. You can always get away in the rain. And there really is no pursuit at night or rain. There's just a matter of, if you try to form a line, they can move right up to it and attack you. I'm afraid I had a bit of a head cold and chest cold and all that. And with all the coughing and everything, it would have been miserable. More importantly, I didn't feel like playing at all. I was really in too bad a shape. So anyway, I came back, played the 4 p.m. turn now, and not a lot's happened. Basically, the French decided to camp down. We're having D'Erlon starting to show up on the map. I don't see how Uxbridge can slow him down. He's probably going to have to pull back. I mean, I just look at the numbers that he has there, and I'm like, there's no way. And it's an interesting factor here. The French could, if the Prussians don't kind of guard the roadway directly, the French could actually slip by them in the rain and night turns by the rules there are, and just then go marching down the road. Now, it's a bit goofy, and I'm not about to allow that, but it's just an indication. Anyway, most of the French are really, really tired, and moving forward in the rain just doesn't make sense. The Brits have to take up a position, and we'll see. you know, you have to remember the rain's going to make the ground soggy, and that's going to cause problems out to here, which I don't know. I really don't know. I think we'll be able to make some movement in the morning to position the French to where we want to attack, maybe force the Brits to move around in response to that. And then we can rest while the last turns of soggy ground are continuing or some such. I don't know. At the 5 p.m. turn, Von Damme tried to charge, but obviously he can't actually hit the units. The one turn I did that, it was cheating. So they pull out in the British turn. What I've decided on is I'm charging 2 points if you take an offensive action, a movement at night. As if you were doing, you know, if you move up adjacent to the enemy, you pay 2 fatigue as if you're doing a charge. Just because it's going to be so painful to try to maneuver in this kind of weather or whatever, knowing that you're getting close to the enemy and everything. I just figured that that would be more painful. But I'm only charging the regular 1, which kind of makes sense because, well, these are 1 hour turns, so maybe any argument would work. But I kind of don't like the idea of this road movement totally fatiguing an enemy, and just the repositioning of the Brits backward. I just, it doesn't feel that comfortable, but I don't know. It's hard to tell. They're obviously moving more slowly because of the rain, because it's only, you know, they're only moving a half hour's movement in an hour. But how much fatigue would that be? Is it a full hour's fatigue? Probably. But anyway, I like making things up as I go, I guess. Fast forward a little bit to nighttime, which is the end of the 9 p.m. turn. The Anglo-Dutch line is pretty much complete here, and then after it got built, Von Damme and the Guard are starting to move into place. So you can see where the attack's going to kind of evolve. Rail's still back here, but it's just so battered. You can see the Huguenot is just being completely ignored. We're looking at an attack from this direction. We feel like A, it's easier than dealing with the Huguenot, and B, it's more likely to get support from whatever, D'Erlon and Grouchy, who are coming down from that side. Uxbridge had to abandon his position. D'Erlon pursued a little bit, or Grouchy pursued actually, yeah, because he's the army commander back there. Over here on this side, VlE has built a defensive line around the road. It doesn't look too likely that Mouton or Gerard is going to be able to get through, and they can't really just circumvent it. The way the game's movement transitions between maps are, you have to follow certain roads. In some cases, like the Ligny to Wavre map, there's a possibility of, oh, you can do this via many different roads. But here, I couldn't say take this little trail instead of the main road and hope to get, you know, onto the map where the fighting's going to be. So, you know, this is going to end up, well, it's an interesting question. You know, what would happen if VlE turns and comes marching after D'Erlon? Well, geez, man, that just really makes for a complicated situation. On the other hand, he is a smaller force than Gerard or Mouton. He can probably hold them off. That's probably as good as he can do. But the chaos of, like, you know, VlE marching down, hitting these guys in the rear, and then these following up and hitting them in the rear. That's the kind of thing we've seen in this game a couple of times, and I really don't like to see that. It's really hard to tell what's going to happen in those circumstances. But no general would do that, right? but it might actually be the best thing to do in the game circumstances, simply because it's almost like this random chaos thing. The one reason not to do it, the really strong reason not to do it, is the French units move faster. Of course, not on the off-board, but they're going to be able to hit me before I can hit them. So it's going to end up something kind of goofy anyway, eventually. And, you know, it's quite possible Durlone could turn and I end up surrounded and destroyed that way, while the little Uxbridge force isn't really able to do much. Durlone can probably hold that off with half his force. That's why they're pulling back. In fact, they're hoping to hold this line, but they're fine with pulling back to this area as well. That was sort of the extent of their allowed retreat. However, it doesn't look like, you know, the line would hold, because it would be pretty easy to come around from behind it in that case. So I kind of have to keep that distance and try to hold them away that way. Theoretically, for Waterloo itself, there's a victory point system in play. There is for all of the battles. And the problem is, well, what do you do? Well, obviously, Ligny was a massive French victory, however you want to look at it. Quatre-Bras looked like pretty much a draw. Here at Wavre, what we're going to be facing is the French managed to slip through, and now we've got this hold-off maneuver. And whatever comes from that comes from it, and we'll see and try to kind of judge that. But this is where the main event's going to be, so I'm looking more at the Waterloo scoring. Now, for the Waterloo scenario, the scoring ends up being basically a point for each corps that you demoralize, 2 points if you drop it to desperation level. And then there's some terrain considerations. There's 1 point for the 4 strong points near the battle, the fortified farms. Then there's a point for holding both of these, a point for holding Waterloo itself, and 3 points for holding the road to Brussels. So obviously the road to Brussels is a pretty important, you know, goal that we're going to be aiming for. I'm going to take these off because I'm not really paying too much attention to this. I just wanted to get an idea of, you know, what the designer saw as worth valuing for Waterloo itself. And it seems pretty reasonable to me. I'm going to look at the casualties for the campaign as a whole. But one of the big things is certainly being able to drive there. On the other hand, I don't know how much it matters, you know, if the French can slip units through there. That's not terribly important. What's important is making the major roadways clear. So you've got to get through Mont Saint-Jean. You know, you can't say, oh yeah, well, we kind of divert this way and took a way around, and, you know, I feel like that doesn't count as really controlling that road, even though it would under the normal Waterloo scenario. Anyway, this is just to help me try to figure out what my strategy for the final day will be. The end of the night turns, not much has changed. Napoleon is gathering with Drouot and whoever Van Damme's replacement is to discuss what they're planning on doing. It's still raining at this point. I don't know when the rain actually stops. In the game, it stops at 11, but let's see if we've got yeah, I don't think I think the rain ended in the night, so yeah, the rain ended around 6 a.m. So we're right about at the point where the rain is actually ending. And that means anything that I do, I'm going to be facing defensive infantry fire at the very least. So there's not going to be the opportunity like there was perhaps in the earlier part of where we had the guard you know, kind of chasing some units, and we had Van Damme chasing some units. It's not going to barely be a point at which I can just sort of force in using straight melee combat or close range combat. And I think I may delay so that I get my artillery into place, etc. Anyway, everything is just about recovered except Wellington's stuff. Most of his stuff's okay, but these two units back here, which at least rallied, are a little beaten up still. They'll have some time to recover, though, if Napoleon gives them a chance to do so. Over here, likewise, you know, I probably don't want to press the attack right away. Try to give the benefit of the doubt to try to make things, you know, as close to the historical in terms of the reaction to, gee, the weather's really bad, you know, the ground's really mushy. I probably should set up and prepare for that artillery fight. The problem with any of that is whatever setup you do telegraphs your move, and I'm kind of thinking to attack more to the flank here. Historically, the attack was right up the center. One of the reasons Napoleon couldn't really get away with that historically was the fear of a fairly large Prussian army possibly coming in. So he felt like he had to move quickly, and he couldn't try to be too clever. Although I would think an outflank in this direction might have been a little safer. There are, however, I believe still some British troops out that way, even if they're not involved in the game. I don't think they can be too much, though, because there's a few units that are left out of the base game that are on the chart there, which are probably available, but that's about it. And I think, yeah, we got them piled up over here. So it's a fair-sized little force that could have been available that it won't be. And it's kind of interesting to think, well, wait a minute, you know, if the situation was more dire, would the Brits have made a call for more reinforcements? You know, what can you do? Yeah. Those forces are included in the game if you want to try to do something like that. Here, I don't think the Brits have much chance of holding, but whatever. One thing I found interesting was I discovered, just to show you how ignorant I am in general, that Napoleon wasn't able to use conscription for this version of the army. The French king had revoked the conscription orders, and that was such a popular move that Napoleon didn't feel like he could, upon returning, invoke, you know, conscription again with any safety. He was popular, but not that popular, and so he ended up having to, you know, either convince people to join up or try to get them by other means. And so he probably could have gotten a bigger army if he could have gotten the conscription orders in place. It's hard to tell. He didn't have a lot of time here, to tell you the truth. All right, let's send this one up, and we'll start coverage of the 18th itself on the next video.